Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 484. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes, Allah HaShalom, and Emerita Baruch Binyamin Ben Menucha Lano Altes, Yukasil Ben Leah Rachel, and Rachel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Tadris Ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rachel Altes. The Jewish people, the eternal Jewish people, are here throughout history, survived and thrived through the most difficult times, and we're faced yet again with another challenge, with a war raging in Gaza, with our dearest and finest at risk, putting themselves at risk, and yet, as we have in the past, like we say in V'hisha Amdalanu, B'chol Deir V'deir Emdim Aleinu L'chalasenu, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu Matzilenu Miyadam. We have the power of a greater strength that we access, that gives us special strength in times when there are challenges. Like the Maimon Bas Lagani talks about Bizbruz Ha'etzes, the splurging of the most precious and the most concealed, meaning the most intimate treasures of the divine, are given to fight battles. And battles in this world, in the difficult, hostile world in which we live. So this does not necessarily comfort us or in any way minimize the tragic losses, the atrocities, young people who've fallen in battle. But it does empower us to know that we could get through it, that for every darkness we have even more light within us. And this is a central message that we need to keep and hold on to, especially in times like this, both for ourselves, our children, our families, and especially in our prayers for the Tzahal, for the Israel Defense Forces, those actually sacrificing themselves. So, may God protect them all. Hashem Yishmer Tzeischa Ve'echa, we invoke all these many verses where God Himself promises and says that I shall protect my people, especially in the Eretz Asher Eini Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereishis Hashana V'ad Achris Shana, in the land that has special providence, God watching over it from the beginning to the end. Now God watches over the entire world, but there's a special hashgacha in the Holy Land. So this is in all times. But now we've also entered the month of Adar, which is especially fortuitous time, an auspicious time, where we say Mazoli Gever, that the mazel of Eden is stronger, and that's why even when we're facing with challenges, it says this is the time to, if you have to go to court with someone who, this is the best time to do so, meaning if you have any challenge. And it's a month where Mashanachnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, we increase in joy. So all this gives us further power in dealing with any challenge that comes our way. This year, it's the first of 2 months of Adar, due to being a leap year, so it's a double Simcha, and that will lead right into Mismach Gula Legula, from the Gula of Adar, second Adar, into Nisan, the month of Gula of Pesach Mitzrayim, all indicating the powers of Geula. That doesn't mean that we're not in Golus. It means that Golus is a march toward Geula. Like we discussed weeks ago when we started reading this Sefer Shmois, which the Ramban calls Sefer HaGeula, the whole Sefer is called Geula. Even from the bitter beginning of the chapters that talk about the bitter exile and the bitter slavery, it's also part of Sefer HaGeula because it's a long narrative. It frames chapters in a larger story. And that's what we need to always keep in mind. And Kimet says, Chameres Mitzrayim, Aren and Flores, just as it was in Mitzrayim, so too will it be today, and even in a greater scale, leading to the ultimate Gula Amitis Vashlema. So we're also in Parshas Terumah. So we have the power of Parshat Terumah, which we shall discuss. Central theme, Parshat Terumah, is V'oseli Migdash V'shachanti B'seichem, the power to build a temple, to build a sanctuary for God in this material world. in the material world. So yet again emphasizing that despite this not being the most spiritual of worlds, and quite the contrary, a dark world, all these elements contribute to give us the strength, to give us the power to bring light, to transform the world into Basa Ligani, Tagani, to a garden, to a beautiful home for the divine. So this is overall an overview of how this week's Torah portion and time period provide us with lessons and strength. And it's important to hold on to these things. The words of Rameir Meprim Mishlan, as Mitzugibun Eben, when we're bound above, you don't fall below. You have something strong to hold on to, strong foundations as well. So let's talk a bit more about Parshas Terumah, and then we'll talk about Adar more detail. What lessons can we learn from Parshas Terumah? So as I said, the central theme of this parsha is the building of the sanctuary. If you think about it, you see it's actually in a very progressive order. The main themes of this book of Shmois in general, which is really after the book of the Ovis, Sefer HaYosher, Breshis, and as the Mittler Rebbe explains, that's in a sense like laying out the blueprint. But the real life, the real challenges of life, even though Breshis is full of challenges and many lessons, but from Am Yisrael's point of view, where do we become forged into a nation? The real story begins in Parshas Shmois, Sefer Shmois, which explains, as he explains, it's the Mittler Rebbe in Teres Chaim, why the first Sefer Bereshis covers over close to 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years, from creation all the way to the passing of all the Shvatim, and to the beginning that would become Sefer Shmois. From Sefer Shmois till the end of Sefer Dvarim, 4 books, cover only 40 years. Let's count the 210 years of the exile, but that's only a chapter or 2.5 chapters to be exact. But the bulk is only 40 years. When they leave Egypt, in Parsha Boy, all the way to V'zei Sabracha is 40 years of traveling in the wilderness till they come to the east bank of the River Jordan, before they enter into Eretz Yisrael, which is already in Sefer Yeshua, in the book of Joshua, the next book. So you see that the main story is in these 40 years. When I say main, in Torah you don't say main, secondary. That's not the point. The point is, as the Mittler Rebbe explains it in such a beautiful, eloquent way, there's laying the groundwork. The Ovis laid out all the building blocks, and then the implementation of it, Ma'aseh Ovis Simla Banim, happens in these chapters. So what do you see? The central themes of Sefer Shmois is, number one, Yetzias Mitzrayim, which includes Kriyas Yamsuf, the parting of the sea, which is the conclusion of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the redemption, the exodus from Egypt. Number two, Matan Torah, they receive the mandate at Har Sinai, 50 days after they leave Egypt. And the third is the building of the Mishkan, which will take us throughout till the end of Sefer Shmois, the building of the Mishkan, and then the erection, and the first day that the Mishkan stands. Going further, Vayikra is already, once they build the Mishkan, that Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that it was established, get all the laws. The beginning of the journey through the world, the continuance, I should say, but the main bulk of the journey would begin in Parsha Ba'aleischa. So from Vayikra, through the whole Sefer Vayikra, through Bamidbar, Nosim, Ba'aleischa, says on the 20th of Iyar, the cloud rose, and they began their journey, their continuing journey through the wilderness. So these 3 central themes are critical because these establish essentially what makes a nation, and it's also on a microcosmic level what makes a person. One is that we have to get out of our limitations and constraints. As long as you're enslaved to your fears, to your inhibitions, to the various addictions that we may have, to things that trap us, that's called Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim includes all Mitzarim v'Gvulim, every constraint, every limitation, everything that limits us. So we need to first become free. Because as much as revelation and as much power that you can be given, if you're enslaved, psychologically primarily, not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, you can't move. So that's the first thing. Then comes the second thing: is you need a mandate, a blueprint how to live. That's Matan Torah. So B'tziach es ha'amim Mitzrayim, Tavdan es ha'alikim al ha'ar hazeh, the leaving of Egypt from the Mitzarim v'Gvulim, from these limitations. Now you're ready to receive the mandate, and it leads to that. As a matter of fact, the challenges of living in Mitzrayim, like mina meitzer karasi ka, that you go through when you live through stress and through hardship and through affliction, you actually thrive and blossom and now ready to receive the Torah. Like we say every day on a personal level. We say, Nafshi ka'ofar la'kel tiyeh, my spirit is humble before all, like offer, like dust. Psach libi b'seidasecha. So Nafshi ka'ofar was established by Mitzrayim. It humbled us, but it also strengthened us. Now, this like the kur habarzel, like the smelting pot that smelts and hardens the metal. And now, psach libi b'seidasecha, matan Torah, our hearts can be expanded. Min ha'meitzer karasi ka. From Mitzrayim, you come to Anani b'merchav ka, the great and unprecedented revelation at Sinai. However, what's still lacking is the concretization of it all. Comes afterwards the Mishkan. Now that you have that internal spiritual freedom, and it's been translated, you have received the mandate at Sinai, the blueprint for life. Now you have to implement the blueprint, which is in general through Torah and mitzvahs, but specifically, the central theme of it all is V'oseh li migdosh v'shachanti b'secha. Build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell and rest and live among you. V'shachanti, Shekhinah, among you. And how is this Mishkan built? From the physical material world. So now we're taking all the strength we received from leaving Egypt, Mitzrayim, the receiving the Torah, and turning it into actual Mishkan. Of the 12, 15 materials that are enumerated, gold, silver, copper, to build an environment, to build a sanctuary where God dwells. So it's a central theme in our lives as well. There is, the first thing is to access the ability to reach some freedom. Second is a blueprint for life. And 3 is to build something with it, to build a home. A home, a beautiful home, an environment in the hostile, dark world that will be a beautiful garden. And from there, spread that vibe, spread that environment into the entire world. So it's a lesson to each one of us. How revolutionary is the idea of building a temple in and from this physical world? So let's discuss that. Extremely revolutionary. Because think of it from a philosophical point of view, we would think spirituality and materialism are antithetical to one another. You want to be more spiritual, you have to give up, in some way suspend, some way reject, or at least put aside material pursuits. Material pursuits are about yourself, of the gravitational pull of the material world. Spirituality is the sublime, it's transcendent. And here we're told not to go up on a mountain, not to escape from the material world to find a sanctuary for God, not to go to heaven where there's no bodies and there's no physicality, meaning in the spiritual realms, but in this physical world, like he says clearly, Terumah, from the material world. And King Solomon already was surprised by this, as he says, Hashamayim v'shamei Hashamayim, the heavens and the heavens of heavens, lo yichal kalucha, cannot contain you. Avke abayis hazeh, how is this small little structure going to contain you? Nothing can contain God. And here you're saying, v'shachanti b'seichem, that God will be contained here. And God says to him, yes, what you just read as a surprise, in a surprising tone, read b'nechusa, read it as a statement. Though heaven of heavens and heavens of heavens cannot contain me, avke abayis, dafke. Specifically, it's this structure in tachtenim, Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, that I desire to have a home in the lowest of worlds, which teaches us that spirituality, though it's a stepping stone and definitely is a journey toward reaching higher levels of consciousness and transcendence, but it's not the end of the story. God is neither spiritual nor physical. As Chassidus explains, there's Eidus and there's Kalim. There's the energy, there's the containers. There's a soul, there's a body. But then there's something that brings them both together that's higher than both. There's Sevav Kalam, there's Mamala Kalam. There's transcendent energy and there's immanent energy. A divine that relates to existence and a divine that's beyond existence. And then there's a force that is beyond both, which is Atzmus. Atzmus is beyond both and wants both and joins them together. So in truth, whereas many spiritual disciplines will talk about moving from a materialistic life to a spiritual life, Judaism and Torah will talk about a step further, moving to a holy life, moving to a godly life, which is more than just a spiritual life, and is the ultimate experience. And the Mishkan captures that. So this is quite revolutionary. Because it's not just, we say Matan Torah joined heaven and earth, marriage of heaven and earth. That before that, Elyenim and Tachtenim were two separate worlds, meaning the spiritual and the material could not join together. And now we can join them together. That was the power of Matan Torah. But where was it exemplified? Where was it actualized and personified? That was the Mishkan. So the Mishkan actually represents the avodah of all of us. Like he explains Takim Basiligani, the last Maimer published by the Frierdiker Rebbe and the first delivered by the Rebbe, and then every year the Rebbe would say the Maimer with the corresponding chapter. This year it was chapter 14. And the central theme is exactly that the beginning when the world was created was Ikashchina B'Tachtenim Meisa. But due to human sins and transgressions, that got concealed, the divine presence. Generation after generation, and Avram Avinu, and the subsequent generations reconnected and realigned existence to the divine blueprint. Until Moshe built the Mishkan, the Der Ashvi, the seventh generation from Avram. So too says the Rebbe. We are the seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe, and we have the mission and the job, and we will finish the work of rebuilding the third Beis Hamikdash, the permanent one, of bringing the Shechina B'Tachtenim and the Gula Amitis Vashlema. So this is the central Aveda, as the whole Maimer discusses how we do that, how we transform the darkness and the lies, deception, and the duplicity of this world from Sheker to Keresh to Kroshim, the Shtus to Lumazeh, and the insanity and the irrationality of negative forces, how to transform that into super rational commitment and faith and devotion. And who does it? The soldiers, Tzivus Hashem, and they're given the resources, as we discussed before, the tremendous treasures, the highest levels, l'mayla aden ketz, l'mata aden tachlis, l'mayla aden ketz, all the way to the Helam Ma'atzmi, the highest levels of the divine, that help us transform the darkness of the world. Because this way you could say, one second, darkness and light are antithetical to each other. Like I said before, spirituality, spirit and matter are antithetical. But we go to a place that's higher than both light and darkness, and therefore we can join the two and actually transform, not just eliminate, not just dispel, but transform the darkness into light. And that is our work, which only increases the message for today, that we're facing different types of darkness and challenges. That's part of the plan. Not necessarily are we expecting this to this extent. We always want a minimal amount of pain. But when it comes our way, we know that we have the power to transform it all into, not just eliminate it and eradicate it, but to transform it into a tremendous asset that will only make us stronger and bring the Geula. Okay, that is regarding Terumah. Now, being it's also the beginning of Adar Rishon, so lesson from Adar, we spoke briefly that Adar is a special month, especially around joy. So how can one be joyous in times of war and loss? So the answer we just received. Because as bad as war may be, and the losses that it incurs, and the tragedies, and the broken and shattered hearts and families that we see, and we don't minimize, and we cry with that, and we do whatever we can to console and comfort and to eradicate the forces, the evil forces that perpetrated such atrocities. Make sure it never happens again. In addition to all that, we know we have tremendous strengths. And for given such a challenge, we have even deeper strengths. So the month of Adar, that's exactly what Adar is telling us. Adar is telling us that even, it's one thing to be joyous in good times. And in many ways, these are good times. I just want to make that clear. But if it's completely beautiful times, times of peace, times of harmony, and so on, so then, yeah, you appreciate it, and you should be joyous and celebrate God's blessings. It's more difficult in a time like when there's challenges, and you say, look at the news, and look how sad it can be, and how depressing, and the dangers involved. And there's families that, praying, we're all family for every one of those soldiers. That's when we need joy even more. But because the definition of joy is not what people think. Joy is not frivolous celebration, ignoring and escaping realities. Joy is that deepest connection we have with God, with our purpose. And that gives a sense of, I say the word calm, serenity, knowing that you're here for a purpose. When you know you're here for a purpose, even if you're going through difficult moments, that's part of your purpose. And that gives you strength. We're bound to that. So the joy of Adar is not a superficial joy. It's coming from the depths. And that's why indeed we say Simcha Peretz Geder. The Rebbe Rashab explains it at length in Samach to Samach, Tafresh Nun Zayin, which he said and delivered at the Frierdiker Rebbe's wedding. Simcha Peretz Geder. Simcha breaks through all boundaries. We talked before about Mitzrayim, which is like boundaries, limitations, constraints. It breaks through. And you see that. When a person is joyous, the usual routines, the usual structures and hierarchies melt away. There's a certain transcendent experience. Because joy accesses the very natural joy of a soul that knows it's fulfilling the purpose of its existence. And there's nothing more fulfilling than that. Now, there's a form of tainug, and there's simcha. Tainug is more silent. It's more the inner serenity. Joy is more the celebrated, the gilui of it. Say tainug is chochmah, simcha is bina, em abonim smecha. But nevertheless, it's a simcha that's coming from that connection. So there's a simcha where you see a person dancing and singing and celebrating in a very revealed way. But then there's a simcha sachayim, simply a certain joy of life, joy of existence, that I know I am here and I know I'm doing what I should be doing. You could even argue, and I'm saying argue, you could even make the strong point that true joy comes from there. As much as you mask painful situations in life or difficult situations, it's still a Band-Aid. Real joy is when you feel purpose. You feel that you are doing exactly what you should be doing. And if you know that you're now in a place where God wants you to be and that's your mission, that is enough reason to give you tremendous joy. You'll say that mission may be a difficult one. Yes, but it's your mission. And that overrides the specific circumstances, which means there are times that mission, and we pray the mission should be in light, but sometimes that mission takes you through darkness. So there's day and there's night. Not everything is always day. And part of the night is actually to transform the night, and you bring Yisr Ne'er Min HaCheshech, even stronger light. All that leads to tremendous joy. That's how we can be joyous in times like this, because it's a joy of purpose. It's not a joy just of external machinations or external forms of expression, but it's coming from a very deep place, which also can have physical and external manifestation. Okay. Many questions have been coming in. I'm assuming it's because, in general, Moshiach is on many people's minds, but especially in times like this, when you say, what's going to be? Which is not what the Rebbe trained us to ask. He always asked, what are we going to do, not what was going to be. But when you think, what will be the solution, many people say, it's so complicated that the only way is Moshiach should come. Obviously, we all understand that sentiment, and we do pray for Moshiach, but we still have to do what we have to do. That's why the Frierdiker Rebbe said that the expression in the end of Masechta Seder, where it says that after he talks about all the negative signs of the times of Mashiach, before Mashiach's coming, Ikvus in the Mashiach, he says, the Gemara says, Ein lanu lishayin ela al Avinu shebashamayim. We have no one to rely on, no one to depend on, lean on, except Hashem, our Father in heaven. Says the Frierdiker Rebbe, that itself is also part of the simonim, negative simonim, that will say we can't throw up our hands and say we can't do anything, we only rely on God. So as much as we want Mashiach, and as much as we definitely depend on it, and we want it to come and finish this whole Golus once and for all, but it still depends on us to do whatever we can, even to the very fact that we cry out for Mashiach and pray for it. But above all, our Maseinu v'Avodeseinu, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 37 in Tanya, our actions and our Avodah, which is all the building blocks that make up Mashiach. Mashiach is not some disconnected event that comes at the end of time. It's a direct outgrowth. It's the building blocks that we build. The building is Geula, Mashiach. But since many questions have come in, so let's talk about that for a while. And we'll begin with the question, what will the world look like when Moshiach comes? So I began talking about it last week, and of course throughout the weeks, throughout the years, on My Life Chassidus Applied, this has been always a recurrent theme. It's so central to Yiddishkeit, so central to Chassidus, and to the Rebbe's words. So obviously Chassidus Applied would suggest that we would talk about that many times. But it's always good to continue to refresh and talk about new details. It all helps us envision, and most important, do what we can. The Rebbe's classic words, 33 years ago, almost 33 years ago, in Tafshin Nun Aleph Chav Ches Nissen, I have done everything I can. Tut alles was ihr kennt. Do everything you can to bring Mashiach. So one of the first things, as I often talk about, to bring Mashiach, obviously there's the Torah mitzvahs, and especially things that are all learning about Mashiach and Geula, as the Rebbe says, and doing actions that amizaras, that speed up the Geula. In the words of the Rebbe to the CNN reporter, increasing in acts of goodness and kindness. But to go into more detail, when you learn about Geula Mashiach, it's not just learning and it's a Geula. You learn about something, so it's a Geula that has a unique quality to help bring it into reality. But it's more than that. When you learn about Mashiach and Geula, you become Geuladik yourself. And Mashiach and Geula, at the end of the day, is a consciousness change. Obviously, there'll be many physical changes. But above all, it's a consciousness change. The Rambam says that. Lo ye'esa kol ha'elam el l'dasas Hashem bolvad. He says no natural things have to change, especially in the first stages. But the consciousness changes. What changes? That we are focused not on materialism, but on l'dasas Hashem bolvad. As he goes on, it says later from Yeshaya, Mola oris deis Hashem kamayim li'amachasim. So the more we're filled with this day and now, the more we are saturated and mentally prepared, our mindset, our heart set, our soul set, to what Mashiach and Geula is. So envisioning what Geula is critical. So this question is asked, what will the world look like when Mashiach comes? So let's read in more detail. Do we know of any Messianic prophecies that discuss what our daily lives will be like when the Messiah comes? We know in general that evil will be transformed into good, but how will that affect our daily lives? Will we still go to work every day, or will our needs be miraculously taken care of? Will we still listen to music? Will the style of popular music also be transformed into only positive music? And further question in the same vein, what will riding the subway in New York City be like, for example, after Mashiach comes? In a perfect world, will the trains always be on time, always have plenty of seats available? Will it be crime-free and a nice, peaceful ride without being disturbed by bums on the train? By going, in between important announcements about upcoming stations, will the train speakers be used to play a daily Daf Yomi class for the B and Q trains that go through yeshivish neighborhoods and Flatbush and Chassidus classes for the 2, 3, 4, and 5 and Franklin shuttle trains that go through Crown Heights? Will there be a fair discount for using the train to go on Mivtzoyim Erev Shabbos? Okay. What I appreciate is at least turning it into something very real and now, but obviously it's a lot more than what is said here. And the question is, even if we will be in Crown Heights or in Flatbush, and I would make the correction that everybody will be learning Primus HaTeira, Molad is Deis Hashem Kamayim Liyam Mechasim, Deis Hashem, which includes Nigla and Primus, but as the Alter Rebbe explains in Simach Chavav and Ageres HaKedesh, primarily Primus HaTeira, and And we know also that what it says in Shir Shirim, Yishaken Mishikas Piyu, as Rashi teaches there, the Gili of Sedis and Primis and Sedis of the secrets and esoteric part of Torah. But that's just, I don't want to be nitpicky on the details. But I'm glad that you're talking in very real ways, because that's exactly the question we should all be asking. Moshiach comes right now. What will your street look like? What will your house look like? Will there be birds in the sky? And all the other things, the examples you gave. So whenever I speak about this, I always bring two examples, just to make it very, very tangible, very concrete. One is a letter from the Rebbe, Tovshin, the early years, where he's writing to a person who owns a cleaners. A dry cleaners that cleans clothing. The Rebbe says everything is divine providence, so there's a lesson to be learned. As the Baal Shem Tov says, there's a lesson to be learned from everything. What's the lesson from cleaners? So briefly, the Rebbe says, this way you buy new garments. You wear them once, twice, 3 times. After a while, they get soiled, wrinkled, dirty, and you can't wear them again. Comes the innovation of cleaners. No, you bring the clothing to a cleaners. They take it, they submerge it in water, not just water, but warm water. Mix it with chemicals to remove the different stains and so on. Then put it under a heavy press. Voila, you have like a fresh new garment. And you can repeat this process many times in the lifetime of the garment. What's the lesson to us? Neshama shenasata bi tahirihi. The soul you've given me, as we say every morning, is pure, like a pure garment. But then life takes over. Disappointments, mistakes, errors, deliberate, not deliberate. We're hurt, wounded, traumatized. The Rebbe doesn't use all those words, but the idea. So you could think, okay, I've become wrinkled and soiled and dirtied and sullied, and that's that. No. What do we learn from the cleaners? You have to submerge the neshama into water. Ein mayim elateira. And not just water, but warm water. Vadimkeit. Not kaltkeit, but vadimkeit. A warmth, with love, with passion. And you mix chemicals. Every mitzvah is another chemical that removes another stain in our lives. And then you put it under a heavy press. Kabbalas eil malchus shamayim. Kabbalas eil. And that heavy press finally finishes the process. And the neshama is tahirihi, which is what we say every morning again. And you could repeat this process many times. So that's a beautiful lesson of its own. But let me tell you what effect it had on me. After reading that letter, I remember I was walking in Crown Heights, up Kingston Avenue, and I was on by Empire and Kingston, and I saw the cleaners. So usually who notices the cleaners unless you have to go there and bring your clothing? But I noticed it because I saw the Rebbe's letter there. So the cleaners is not just when you bring your cleaners, it's a lesson in life. The lesson of a neshama and its renewal and rejuvenation. And then I saw another cleaners a few blocks after that, and another one. And realized what the Rebbe was doing, besides teaching us the lesson from cleaners, is how to look at the world through the eyes, through the lens of Geula. What is Geula? The Rebbe brings especially a very powerful sikha, 2 sikhas, Achri, Kadeshim, and Emer, Tavshin, Nun, Aleph. Geula is the letters Geula of Golus with an Aleph. So it's not like anything will be diminished from this world. The world as we know it will be exactly the same world, especially in the earlier stages of the Geula. But we'll add the Aleph, the Gili of the Alufe Shalelam, see the godliness, the Bechol Derechecha De'eyu, in a cleaners, in a pizza shop, in a bakery, in the birds, on a subway, in the music, and all the other examples that were given here, and many more. So this is something we can envision right now, we can talk to our children about. Do we live with it 24/7? Halavai. But we could do as much as we can to envision what the world will look like and try to do it that way. That when you see something, you say, it's not just a utility that I need when I have to clean my clothing. It's a lesson in my life, and it helps me find strength, even in difficult times. And that's how the world would be when you say, that all the material world will be only means to know God better, to serve God better, to connect to God. Like I said, b'chol derechecha de'eyu. A second example I give is, I might as well mention it. I was once speaking at a medical conference, not because I'm a doctor, I'm not the son of a doctor, but a few doctors who knew me, they wanted me to take the the what they called it, I think the mystical view or medicine of the future, according to Jewish mysticism, Jewish thought. So I delivered a talk where I spoke a lot about that the concept of death and disease and illness is an aberration. Had Adam and Eve not eaten from the tree of knowledge, it never would have happened. Why? Because why should something have to die? A soul doesn't run out of gas or energy. It can give forever energy to the body. So why can't they be together? Take a cup of water. Besides the factor of evaporation, if the cup is intact, it will hold the water forever. The answer is the cup is intact. But sin, transgression, misaligns the cup from the water, in this case, the world from its engineer. So imagine a machine, which is called life, is not living up to, is not following the guidelines that God said, well, you need to keep this machine healthy. So the appliance begins to wear down. The body begins to wear down. And then the soul continues to have energy, but they can't coexist because the body ages and ultimately is subject to illness and disease, God forbid, and ultimately perishes today. But once we repair those holes, so to speak, through Birudim, through our work of tikkun, of repairing all the punctures that transgressions and dissonance created, and we realign the machine to the way the engineer, the architect of the machine wants us to live, then the body and the soul can reconnect forever. And the eradication of disease and illness and so on. That was the gist of it. So I remember one of the hosts gets up and says, that's very beautiful, but what will happen with us doctors once Moshiach comes? They will no longer be needed. So after the prerequisite joke, maybe that's why doctors charge so much for a long retirement, I said the following. On the contrary, today doctors are needed to heal from disease and illness and try to protect a person and prolong life, etc. Then we won't have the pain of all of that. A doctor, due to his intimate knowledge of human anatomy and human biology and human chemistry and so on, will teach us the secrets of the divine embedded in all of these aspects of our lives. From my flesh I behold God. We were created in the divine image. And the same thing with astronomers about the cosmos, and the same thing with cosmologists and with physicists, and everyone in their field will teach us, just like the lesson from the cleaners will teach us, how that the areas of their work and their expertise there will reveal to us dasas Hashem. Just to tell you, the reaction was extremely positive. There was a big standing ovation. This was a secular medical group of hundreds of doctors. They appreciated it because that's how we have to look at the world. And it also provides another perspective. It's not just, okay, Mashiach is going to come and save us from all our problems. No, Mashiach is the way the world was always meant to be. And it's our job is to align the world as it is right now to what it's meant to be. And when you do that, that's what you bring the Geula. That's why Masenu V'Avodesenu is not just a side thing. It's totally b'Masenu V'Avodesenu. Because Mashiach is about Gili Elikus Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi, as the Alter Rebbe says in beginning of chapter 37 in Tanya. So when you bring Gili Elikus right now in a dry cleaners, or in medicine, or in any area, you're doing exactly that job. And the cumulative effort of thousands of years leads to what's the sum total of that? The Gili of Mashiach and Geula. Okay. What is the difference between the feminine shira lashon nekeva and the masculine shir, like we say, shir chadash, referring to the song of the future, the masculine? The way the person writes it is like this. So, and actually this is discussed because we say, for example, in the Haggadah at the end, by the end of Magid, we say shir chadash. And other places we say shira, like Shabbos Shira, Shira Sayam. So we know that there are 10 shiras that were said, songs throughout history. The first 9 are in the feminine, and the la'asad lava will be the shir lashon zachar, masculine. So the Gemara in Psachim, and the Teisvus actually, on Psachim 116b, and the Tosfos that begins V'nemar explains that shira lashon nekeva is lashon nekeva, like a mother, that yes, she gives birth, and birth is compared to gula, but it's a birth that comes through birth pangs and pain. Whereas l'osid lavi, once we've already dealt with all the birth pangs, we will only have the positive side of it. So it's not, God forbid, to suggest a negative element. It's just two different ways to bring the gula. So the positive shir is what we say, when the Rebbe says the world is ready. It means that we're ready, we've gone through all the challenges. I'll say, what about the latest war that we're fighting? Look, we don't have answers to all the questions, but overall, we've been told time and again that we've gone through everything, and we're now just ready to accept the Geula. Why some setbacks or why things don't appear exactly like that I cannot answer. But that doesn't change the fact that we are here far, far better world than it's ever been for Eden, and that we are on that threshold. Okay. Next question. If the world is truly divine, what exactly are we accomplishing when we create a home for the divine in this lowest of worlds? So we know it says yes. So let's read the question exactly as it was written. What does it mean Hashem wants a dir b'tachtenim, meaning a home for the divine in the lowest of worlds? If Hashem is the only reality and is everything and everywhere, correct, all the different expressions, then he already has a dir b'tachtenim, because he's the only reality in everything and everywhere. So what are we accomplishing by acknowledging God's presence in the world, which is already there, whether we acknowledge it or not? Okay. And the answer goes back to what the very meaning of dir b'tachtenim is. Says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, chapter 36. He says, Tachtenim is not in space. When you say the lowest of worlds, you don't mean the lower, like the lowest floor in a building. It means in quality, in concept, conceptually the lowest. The lowest in the context of divine revelation. That the higher worlds, there's divine expression, divine revelation. Think of a king who's running an empire. There are the cities or the towns or those close to the king, and they feel his presence all the time. As you go lower, you don't feel the presence. So there's a certain independence that emerges. And that's what God wants. To the point, tachtenim, she'ein tacht l'mata mimenu, nothing lower, nothing more concealed. To the point that it's darkness and a double and a quadruple darkness. To the point that there can be forces that defy God and say, Aniva Avsied. He says, Molek lipas v'sitrachre, the Shem gevrim bay, that the wicked prosper there and dominate there. He says, Elam Haz is Kule, it's a world that is full of harshness and difficulties and darkness and hostility. That's where he wants. So the question is, before we talk about dir b'tachtenim, let's talk about the tachtenim itself. Is it a true tachtenim? If God is everywhere, as you just described, so it's not really tachtenim. It's only tachtenim in our perception. Is that real? So the answer is absolutely, because it says, Bereshis bara Elokim hashamayim v'haaretz. God created a reality. It's not an illusion. And the tzimtzum that he used, which is a critical piece in all of this, that Rizal explaining that tzimtzum addition was the way that God concealed his presence, concealed his revealed presence, not his essential presence. Essential presence remains all the time, because it's beyond revelation, beyond concealment. But that concealment is a real concealment. It's also real, because it's also divine. So just as the divine reality is everywhere, the divine concealment is also a factor, as he explains in Shar Yechud V'Amunah, especially in chapters 3 and 4 there. And the Rebbe has a powerful Sichim, Meshpotim Tovshikov Zayin, that explains the brackets at the end of chapter 4, where he talks about, end of chapter 3, is it? Chapter 3 or 4, where he talks about Tzimtzum Nikre Kelim, that the Tzimtzum itself is called containers. It means the Tzimtzum is not just the absence of light, it is the substance of Hein Hein Gvuresav. This is God's Gvuras. It's God's power. So that just the fact that it's concealed doesn't make it less divine. And that's real too. That's what he wants. So in other words, our consciousness and reality, that we don't see God's presence, is real, is not an illusion. That's where God wants Adar b'tachtenim. Now, does it add something to him? You'll say, he was there before, like you just asked. So we don't talk about adding or subtracting. We're talking about nesava. That's what he desired. You'll say, why? Says the Alter Rebbe, "Afatay v'nishtak in kasha." There's no question on a desire. Obviously, the word desire is a limited word, but it's the only word we have to express something that's beyond the rational, super rational, and beyond. That's what he wants. So like it says in some Maimonim, we don't know why he wants it, but we know what he wants. So the answer is that the reality of a concealment is real, and therefore our work is real, doing Torah mitzvahs, of revealing the divine even in a concealed state, and ultimately transforming this tachtenim to be adira loy la'atzmusei, to atzmus, who was the one that put it in place in the first place. Like we spoke before, in this material world. And furthermore, as Chassidus explains, even the very tzimtzum, the very concealment will also reveal and express that it's a divine power. So now when a teacher, for example, reveals a certain amount to his student but conceals most of it, so the student doesn't know how much is concealed, he doesn't even know that is being concealed. But when he becomes aware, he realized the concealment was also part of the process. And that's the ultimate transformation. I mean, if you want to, I don't want to use rational explanations because it doesn't add anything to God, but it is a tremendous breakthrough. Because you're saying, even in a world like this that can defy God, and it does defy God, and look what's going on. Wars are fought, people killing each other. Everything antithetical to God's unity, to bring godliness there is a tremendous achievement. What it does for God is another discussion. But it definitely fulfills his desire. And from our point of view, it's a tremendous change. To bring world peace, to bring a world where we eradicate famine and hunger and death and war and all that Moshiach and Gula brings is the utopia, is the world that everyone aspires to. So it's a tremendous achievement, and it's an achievement also from that point of view for God, because that's what he wants. There should be a dira b'tachtenim. Okay. So there's more questions about Moshiach, but I'm going to use the continuing part of this program to deal with a little more controversial question that has been asked, and I especially did not want to address it in the early months of the war, being that there were more, I think there were more, I don't say important, but more compelling things to talk about, and also did not want to get into anything because we're all united, and it's not important to necessarily emphasize our differences of opinions. Now we're united in eradicating the enemy and bringing true peace to Israel and to the world in general. But it's a question that keeps coming up, and I've been asked again and again, so I felt Chassidus applied. We've always answered all questions. So let me get to the topic of what should be our attitude to Zionism and to displaying the Israeli flag and singing Hatikva. So just for those that may not be aware of all the details, let me just lay it out here. In 1948, Israel became officially UN advised, voted that the majority of the UN that to make a state called the State of Israel. We know before that it was the Balfour Declaration, in the early part of the 20th century, that established that the Jews should have a state in what was called Palestine at the time under the British mandate, under the control of Great Britain. Before that, this part of the land was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Before that, by others. But it's always Eretz Yisrael, as we shall discuss. So, in the end of the 19th century, you may have heard of Theodor Herzl, who was a journalist in Vienna. He covered the Dreyfus case. The Dreyfus case was Alfred Dreyfus was a military person in the French army. He was accused of espionage, falsely accused, And it became clear it was an act of anti-Semitism. It was a big, big thing, till he was finally exonerated. But he was first in prison, and Herzl saw with his own eyes the effects of anti-Semitism. That was just one aspect. And he felt, we need to do something to solve this problem once and for all. And he had different ideas, which maybe we'll talk about as we go along here. But then finally he realized that the only idea would be to get the Jews back into their own homeland. Now, first he thought that homeland should be Uganda. So you could see he was a person who was not aware, as pretty ignorant about Jewish history and Jewish culture in that sense. But some place that they could have their own, and that way they don't have to be at the mercy of their hosts and so on. Ended up being, of course, Israel. And that began a movement which many people were skeptical of, what some call modern Zionism, secular Zionism. It attracted people from all over, including some religious people as well. But then arguments began to break out as well. Is this the right thing to do, not the right thing to do? You had very adamant opposed to the concept altogether. That's only Hashem could take us back to Israel and not we can do this on our own. Others agreed with the idea, because no one disagreed living in Eretz Yisrael was a big thing. Even we know that Ramban and the Shalah and the Rambam, so many great people ended up their lives in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael always remained the center of Jewish life. We always prayed to the east and so on. But there were disagreements about how to facilitate the process. Should we be part of that political process? So those adamantly against, there was obviously those for, and there was no people in between somewhere and over and under. This has created a bunch of different camps and theories and ideas. So the question is, what are the different opinions about the modern state of Israel? Now, of course, with the founding of the state came a Israeli flag, and as well as an anthem called Atikva. And here too, the same argument. Since these were symbols of a secular Zionist state, some oppose it as symbols, not because those particular symbols are bad symbols, but because they represent something that they consider to be not what God wants. And there are those that don't feel that way. And again, there are different variations of it all. I'm not going to go through this. It's not a thorough course on Zionism. But I wanted to begin the topic because people are asking this question. I thought let's put things into context here. So what are the different opinions about the modern state of Israel? So I stated them in general terms. There's the opposition that opposed it before it became a state. There's those that were pro, including religious Zionists, Rav Kook, for example, and the religious Zionists like Agudas Yisrael or Mizrahi and others. And then those that are the secular Zionists, the secular parties. At the time, we all know in Zionism itself, there was also a whole bunch of variations. I think I count 8 or 9, including spiritual Zionism, agricultural Zionism, socialist Zionism. What dominated in 1948 was socialist Zionism, the kibbutz style. But there were others. There was Jabotinsky had a different approach. There was Echad Ha'am, Osher Ginsburg, another approach. So there's many, as usual, when it comes to Jews, you'll have many opinions. I will go over this, but I want to just lay out first the basic things. Now, it's also important to remember that things changed in 1948. Because before 1948, it was still theoretical. So you could say, fine, we disagree philosophically. But once there's a state, what happened there? So there were people who changed their positions. The philosophical opposition may have remained, but the bottom line is now Jews are living there. And we have to protect them. They need utilities and they need protection. They need an army. So you'll have those that support that, even though they may not support the state in the context of a religious state. It's a secular state. And like every state needs to have a government that needs to have governance and laws. So you support that. But there are those that are opposed to that. There were people who did not want to even benefit from the utilities like water and electricity, and did not want to pay taxes, did not want to participate in the military. So there was that's extreme as well. I'm saying it here not to present one side over another, just to present that there are many sides to this. So obviously the question is, what is Chabad's approach? And we know that there's a famous letter from the Rebbe Rashab very much adamantly against, but that's prior to the state. So that's another question in this discussion. Why did the Rebbe Rashab oppose the creation of a secular state? And then the question is the Rebbe's position different? And did the position change in 1948? These are a whole bunch of questions that need to be addressed. So briefly, and I'm going to be brief, and hopefully in future programs elaborate more next week and so on. So briefly, again, without going through all the opinions, the main reason of the opposition, and here too there are many points, is one is a religious opposition. That it's only God that sent us into Golus and that can take us out of Golus. And there's actually prohibitions of Jews trying to force their way back into Eretz Yisrael. So based on that, there was an opposition. Now you can ask, once there is a state, even if you opposed it, but now there are Jews there, and you indeed see many, many religious Jews, even those that oppose, live in Eretz Yisrael. Because again, this was never an opposition to the land of Israel as a holy land. There's halachas, there's laws. You're not allowed to go into the Temple Mount, even in Golus. The laws of Trumas Amaisis. You're supposed to take off Trumas Amaisis, the different things when in the agricultural laws separate from the first fruit and from the different things that need to be done when you're producing harvest. The laws of Shemitah, every seventh year, that apply today. So that applies no matter what. But the question is about control, dominion over this part of the world. So some felt that dominion will come with Moshiach's coming, and we shouldn't force God's hand. There are those that felt that we're not forcing our way, we're negotiating. We're trying to find a peaceful way to come to Eretz Yisrael. And we never went to war against anyone. It was always defensive wars. And in that case, yes, we diplomatically convinced Balfour and the UN to be sympathetic. And therefore, it doesn't defy those, it doesn't go against God's law. And God clearly supported it because, you see, Israel was successful. This 6-day war of miracles and other miracles. Obviously, the completion, they'll say, of all of this will come with Mashiach and Gula, but as much as we can do, let's do. Some even say that that's part of the steps toward the Gula. Well, they call it Schalta de Gula, the beginning of redemption. However, the Chabad view is not like that. The Chabad view is like this. The Rebbe Rashab was against it for the reasons that I mentioned. Because essentially a secular state really meant a godless Israel. And that was part of the emphasis, to take God out of the picture. Just like Yiddishism was at a time, Yiddish was meant to represent a way to replace Torah mitzvahs. So it was driven by replacing Torah mitzvahs, that what will bind us all together is our national home. So it wasn't against having a homeland and against the holiness of Israel, God forbid. But it was a godless one with very deliberately cutting out Torah mitzvahs, and that means that it's a movement, a secular movement, with a very deliberate effort of cutting out everything that is holy and sacred to us. Now, once the state become a state, would he have had the same position? So let's go to the Rebbe. The Rebbe and the Rebbe Rashab are one, like all the Rabbeim. It's not like he had a different opinion. The difference is time. Once it became a state, like the Rebbe said to people, now it's something we support, not because something changed religiously. It's because now Jews are coming there, so no different than you have a community council anywhere in the world. You need to organize, as I said, utilities, services, a military. You need to protect them, especially among enemies. What would have been said if it wasn't a state yet? So that opinion would have said, we don't have to push it. And we're not dependent on the UN or the Balfour to tell us when Israel belongs to us. It always belongs to us. And we'll talk about that more as well. But the general approach is that therefore there's a support for the very fact, but it doesn't necessarily have to have Messianic or Geula implications, meaning not to be called Aschalta de Geula. You could call it a taste of what will come in the future. That's like Toyemea, an appetizer. You see now over 8 million Jews there. So it's a form of kibbutz golius, of Jews gathering. But you cannot call the beginning of Geula. That will be only when Moshiach comes. Is it setting the stage and helping? Yes, like we spoke before, Maseinu Avad Deseinu. Every time we do a mitzvah, it sets the stage for Moshiach and Geula. Definitely when Jews are doing mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael. And we have to do everything to support Torah and mitzvahs there. And actually have influenced the secular. So before there was a state, that same purpose was there to influence everybody and inspire everyone. Now there's a state, meaning a secular state, so therefore we still have the same work to try to inspire and teach, and that's why you have Chabad Shluchim all over Israel, reaching to everyone. It's not like, oh, because you're secular, we're against you. No, God forbid. Never. So it's a subtle element because there's support. And that's why Chabad is part of the military and definitely pays taxes and everything involved in every possible way. However, the issue would be more of, I guess, a theological one. That we don't call it Geula. Now, that's not necessarily controversial. It's a different opinion. You say you don't agree with it? Fine, you cannot agree. But it's not a rejection. And that's why what's going on today in the war, we're all part of it. And there are many who may still see the state as a secular state and not a religious state, but nevertheless are part of and do whatever it takes to protect innocent men, women, and children. On the contrary, the Tzahal and the IDF are doing the most sacred work you can do, which is to protect other people and sacrifice yourself in the process. Now, because of time limits, I will leave this for part 2. We'll talk more about this, because it also comes down to what are the implications and how should be our attitudes, especially now. But I will say, in a concluding note, it's critical to keep in mind, we are one nation. At the end of the day, even if we have these different opinions, that doesn't take away from the total avos and achdus Yisrael with everyone. Even people who I totally disagree with, even if it's coming from ignorance or coming from a deliberate place, and we're united, especially in a time of emergency, in a time of war, it's our unity that keeps us together. So I wanted to make that very clear, that even discussing these points, that's why I wanted to make sure to separate the two, should not be seen in any way, God forbid, as not total, absolute support for the government, for the military, for everyone making decisions, and God should bless them with the clarity. And on the contrary, I think this discussion could actually help achieve clarity and help influence, because it's not about winning or changing your opinion, it's about clarifying matters. And I absolutely believe that when people will understand the Rebbe's approach, Chabad approach to all of this, it'll only help appreciate, to support Israel, not, God forbid, the opposite. And that's the ultimate goal, that the love for Israel and our connection is not just intact, more stronger than ever, and that is the key thing to keep and to emphasize. As I said, we'll discuss this more. So Hashem should bless Eretz Yisrael and all the people, all the Jews there, and all the innocent men, women, and children, especially those that are sacrificing their lives. The hostages should be released unscathed. And we should only have Shalom HaYisrael with the Gula Mitzis Vashlema. It should be a continuing Freilich Chedesh Adar, Shenichnes Adar Marben Besimcha, Mailam Bekedesh. Every day in Adar we increase in joy. And as the Rebbe emphasizes, 2 months of Adar, so it's double joy. And we discussed earlier, a joy that's not frivolous. On the contrary, it's a joy that comes from a deep connection to understanding what our mission is. And that joy itself will help break through all the barriers, including the darkness. Finally put an end to all the negative and only positive going forward. Everyone be well. And this has been My Life Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Kol Tov.
This program is brought to you by My Life, Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.